But like I said, the law is hard to catch up with that. And in Virginia, I believe when it comes to lack of water and dehydration, and maybe one other element, I think the law has caught up with the hard science and the facts. And you will see lawsuits for gross negligence and or criminal prosecutions. Unfortunately, two things have to go along with that. There'll probably have to be an autopsy because you have to truly prove cause of death, because the other side, the defense attorney, will fight that. And two, in civil law, you have to prove proximate cause. Was that the cause of death? In criminal law, you have to disprove cause of death. There's no proximate cause. There's no civil word in there. As far as vicarious liability, which is what you're talking about, which means a person who went in and committed the deed is obviously guilty, but the person who helped, even though they didn't commit the actual deed, the person who's in the getaway car, they're all liable criminally. The same thing works in civil law. In my opinion, whereas criminal law has really caught up with vicarious liability, you commit a burglary, you commit a murder, everybody who's involved in that is going to get caught. May not be punished exactly the same, but they've committed the same crime. In civil law, that's still a gray area. So I answer it like this: the person in power who really makes the decision certainly would be the person who gets sued, the head coach. If it is so gross that people around that person, assistant coaches, trainers, athletic directors, things like that, who have direct knowledge of the situation and direct knowledge of the science, could certainly be vicariously liable, and they would have to. You have to understand that in civil law, you're helping a family or a person gain justice civilly. So you only have to prove it against one person for that insurance policy to pay, even though you like to send a message to everybody. In criminal law, they're trying to catch everybody that committed a crime.
Okay.
That's the difference.
Okay.
So yes, there would be vicarious liability civilly. Whether they go after everybody is different.
Okay.
And I don't think we're there yet.
So again, that closes up the last question I have, and this is to bring up what you talked about before. The athletic trainer's position statement on exertional heat stroke lists 13 conditions that would be a confluence of risk factors, whether it be one or whether it be more than one. And it's interesting when you look over this, and when you look at the conditions of heat stroke, and they say that water was plentiful, they had athletic trainers on the field, the athletes didn't collapse. Some of them actually walked off the playing field and didn't collapse till later in the locker room, or some of them were actually in the hospital 2 to 3 days after an incident of feeling lightheaded. And again, their core temperatures never came down. But if you look at the list, dehydration, temperature and humidity, barriers to evaporation, illness, history of heat illness, excessive or dark clothing, overmotivation, supplements, medication and drugs, high body mass to surface area, being unacclimated, low VO2 med scores, or lack of frequent rest breaks. With the knowledge that we have, and at the same time the conditions that we have to be responsible to prevent this, it really is a lot more to it than what we've been doing in the past, as far as I know, even weighing players before and after practice to make sure body mass hasn't changed drastically between the two-a-days. I know that's being done more and more to more of the coaches that I talk to, but I know as little as 10 years ago, even that wasn't done at a mainstream across the country, making kids weigh in and weigh out to see how much body mass has been dropped. And then I guess with looking at this, with so much influence outside of what the science says, I mean, people today look at losing 2 to 3 pounds in a week as being healthy, versus knowing that it's severe dehydration. So I guess it's many of all of us have a part in this, when it comes from, again, the legal side to the training side to Dr. Morris is what he's going to speak on, and then the parents to get as much of this information as we can to put a stop on something of a young man dying in August.
Well, I want to be real clear that even though I'm talking about Virginia law, when it comes to any state in the nation, whether it comes to a professional team, whether it comes to a college team at whatever level, or a high school team at whatever level, or whatever sport, these 13 things, and of course I started learning more about sports physiology when I started rowing a lot. 1, to train better, 1, to eat better, 1, to just get better. And as I look at this, and I compare this to when I played football and was on track in the 70s, and of course that was occurring long before the 70s, I look at number 1 and 2, dehydration and temperature and humidity, now as completely accepted. Well, first of all 13 of these, Cameron, they're hard fact. They're science. Any reputable cardiologist or any MD who knows anything about this, or trainer, PhD level or otherwise, will tell you this. There's no wiggle room for this. So if you don't believe this, you're ignoring fact, because it's been fact for a long time. It's just coming out into the limelight more. But as I look at your list, Mike, and I look at number 1 and number 2, dehydration and temperature and humidity, I believe those, even in Virginia now, are accepted so much, maybe not practiced everywhere, but accepted so much within the sports hierarchy that they would, if someone died or was seriously ill because of dehydration, because of lack of water, or heat stroke due to humidity being so high that even if you can sweat, it can't evaporate and cool you off, that would rise to the level of gross negligence, I believe, personally, by our Supreme Court civilly, and gross negligence in terms of criminal prosecution. If I look at, and I've written lines here intentionally because I thought about this hard, 3, 4, and 5, barriers to evaporation. Well, one of those is humidity. That is a barrier. It's just not a physical barrier. But for instance, too much clothing, the zoot suits that they used to make linemen wear on top of their football uniform so that we'd be heavier and lighter on our feet later on, which was another barrier to evaporation. Even if you did have water that you could sweat to have evaporate, that's not completely out there yet. Illness, suck it up. History of heat illness, if you get the truth, suck it up. And when I get through 6 through 13, that's even scarier. Excessive or dark clothing, not understood completely. Over-motivation, not understood. Supplements, I assume you mean illegal supplements like steroids, things like that?
Well, no, even supplements that are sold over the counter that are nothing more than mild diuretics
or ephedrine that can affect
exactly.
your heart or things like that.
Yes, sir. Red Bull, things of that nature. Yes, sir.
Too much that could cause tachycardia, or too much blood pressure, or too much heart rate, things like that.
And for some people, weight loss. I mean, some people take those products.
That's not completely understood. Tobacco, chewing tobacco during practice, medications and drugs, high body mass to surface area. I have a high body mass to surface area, a lot of muscle, small body, unacclimated. Any climber will tell you that. That's why you don't helicopter into base camp when you climb at Mount Everest. You have to walk in. Otherwise, you're going to get very sick when that helicopter lands. Low VO2 med scores, which is a fancy way of saying low aerobic conditioning, which infrequent rest breaks. Those are not completely understood. Those are not, in my opinion, in Virginia yet to the level where people would understand that's gross negligence from a civil or physical. You take a young man who has some of these issues, low aerobic conditioning, all the other things, but this is just so absolutely preventable by just understanding the science and doing it.
Well, thank you very much for spending time with us today and giving us the mindset of how courts or how courts would interpret negligence. The goal here is to prevent heat-related deaths, to be proactive rather than reactive, and thank you very much for all your help that you're doing to bring that on.
No problem, and I'm happy to help any in the future, but one of the sad things, as you well know, and I've seen it in the literature, is that from when I finished high school football in 1975, I guess I started in 71, to now, the death rate's really basically the same. And yet, the science is understood much better. People just aren't doing enough about it.